Hello and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make just about everything from the ground up. In today's episode, I am going to be walking you through the steps on how to make pinch pots. If you are new to this channel, please hit that subscribe button because it does help me out. I basically go through making just about everything having to do with things you would put in your home or find around the house and that sort of thing. Here we go. So the first thing you're going to need is your bag of clay, and I am using this red earthenware clay. It is kind of similar to what you would find in your terracotta pots. It's the same type of clay body, but it does get really messy. So wherever you are working, you want to make sure that it's in an area that you don't care too much about it possibly staining whatever you're working on, because the iron in this type of clay can stain things. You certainly can do this same process with a different type of clay body, a white clay or any type of clay. It's just this happens to be a good sculptural medium to work with, so that's what I'm going to be using. But by all means, this technique will totally work with any other type of clay body. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up my clay, and then I like to just kind of peel back the plastic on itself. Just that way it keeps all of the dirty mess on the outside, and then I can just kind of scoop it back up when I go. Roughly about a third of the way, and I'm gonna pull my wire cutters down to what looks like about 2 inches down. Pull them back up. Do the same thing at the other third of the way. And then one down the middle. And back up. So I have basically 6 sections. Now I'm going to take my wire cutters and position them right at the front of that cube. I want to make sure that I am above the point of where these slices are, so that when I pull this, all of the pieces will kind of come off together. So I'm going to go ahead and position it there. I'm just using my 2 thumbs, kind of give it a pull. Boom. And then I should have some segmented pieces. Perfect. All right, so I'm just going to keep one out from the bag at the moment because I'm just going to make one right now. But these are small enough to go ahead and make multiples. And while I'm working with the one, I'm going to keep my bag closed just so I don't have it dry out. And that's why I like to roll that down like I did. And here we go. All right, and I also have just some scrap clay that I had left around. You could just use one of those extra cubes, and this is going to come in handy in a little bit for my detail work. Go ahead and properly store my wire cutters. Just take a finger, clean off the wire, couple loops, and wrap around, and we're good. All right, and then I also have my serrated rib and some slip and a slip brush. Get that open. Make sure we're all good there. Okay, to start off with this pinch pot method, what you're going to do is you're going to take the palm of your hand and you're going to knock off the corners first of that cube. So you're just gently kind of going around and around and getting rid of all of those corners. It's really important to do this properly, because if you just kind of try and ball this all up with your hands, you risk putting in air pocket. What an air pocket is will end up being just a bubble of air that gets trapped inside of your clay. And if that stays there when it goes into the kiln, once the firing begins, that little air bubble will fill up with steam and can blow apart your piece inside the kiln. So you really want to make sure that you're paying attention to not crease over your clay on itself when you're doing this, and you're just kind of going around. So I got rid of my edges here first, and now I'm going to go ahead and hammer around the corners here, just tapping away. And ultimately I'm trying to form a ball here, but again, I'm paying very good attention to making sure that I'm not creating those air pockets that I just mentioned. Not only would it blow up your piece, but it possibly could blow up anybody's piece that's next to it from that steam chamber exploding. The clay is filled with lots of water, and so when it goes into the kiln and gets heated up at a very high temperature, that water turns to steam and has nowhere to go if it is trapped inside that hole. You open up the kiln and it's a bunch of shrapnel. It's all pieces everywhere. It's not very good. So now, as long as you didn't create that air pocket, you're good to go. You don't have anything to worry about. Anyway, I'm just going to keep using my palm to come around here and form a nice little ball. Now, pinch pot was one of the very early methods of forming. Whoever it was dug in the ground and saw a bunch of this muddy stuff and went, oh, I can use that to make something. And learning the pinch pot method, not just to make pots, but the pinching method in general, could be used for many other applications as like detail pieces when you're applying it to larger coil pieces or slab pieces. So it's really kind of the foundation of learning how to start working with clay with your hand. I have this ball. I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to stick my thumb into the center of the ball, and I don't want to go all the way through. I want to go to where I have about a ½ inch from the bottom, and you kind of have to like go and visualize, okay, where's my thumb? Maybe this thickness away from the bottom is probably good to kind of imagine. So you have to go, okay, is my thumb hitting about here? And do I have close to where that is? And you can check on the inside. Wherever that landed is going to become the bottom of your piece. So you don't want a really thick bottom, and you really don't want a too thin bottom either. So for now, it's okay just guessing, because once you start opening it up, you'll kind of be able to gauge a little bit better. If you are working with this red clay, it does not like to be handled all that much. It's kind of a material that is really great with creating sculptures, but you don't want to overwork the clay. So when you go about forming your pot here, you're going to want to try and get a form fairly quickly, and then you can spend all of your time adding on things and doing the detail parts afterwards. So in your head, you need to visualize, okay, what am I going for? You could use this method to make all kinds of different shapes. It could be, you know, a square, a triangular shaped little vessel. It could be, I don't know, a turtle, a basket, all kinds of funky things it could be. I'm going to stick my thumb back into that hole, and using my index finger and my middle finger, I'm going to begin to pinch. That's why it's called pinch pot method. So I'm pinching around the edges here, and you'll see as I'm going along, the clay is getting a little bit cracky because, like I said, this type of clay body doesn't like to be handled too much. It's easy to get rid of these, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But you could also use the surface that you're working on as a way to kind of give you some support as you're pinching. So I'm going to just give it a little tap on the bottom and then go ahead and work around it, continuing to do my pinching. I want to make sure that the side walls of this pot is around the same thickness as the bottom here. So now at this point, I can go in and kind of pinch around the bottom and feel, is it really thick, and thin it out a little bit more if I need to. I'm going to go ahead and form this into a more circular type of shape here. This is the point where you kind of got to work fairly quickly. Now I'm going to take my fettling knife and get rid of some of these cracks here. When you have cracking like this, the very last thing you want to do is start adding a bunch of water. I know people think, oh, let me just add some water and it'll rehydrate it. The cracks are not from it being dry, it's from handling it. The inside of this clay has what's called grog, and this little tiny bits of already fired clay that's put in here, and as you're manipulating, you're actually stretching and pulling those little bits apart, and that's what causes the cracking, not so much a moisture issue. So what you need to do is kind of smash them all back together. And so to do that, I'm just going to take my fettling knife here and pushing down with some pressure, just kind of blending them back together. If you try and add water to this thinking that that's what the problem is, all you're going to do is make those cracks even worse. The water will go in, it'll look like it's doing something, and then as soon as the water absorbs and dries up, the cracks will get even worse. There you go. I just using my fettling knife. Now I can come back and just do a little bit of hand blending. And you can fuss with this as much as you'd like. For the most part, you know, your finger just blending will get rid of any of those cracks that you might see. I'm not going to fuss with this too much because this is just a sample here. Totally ugly pot, right? That's okay. Generally, we make pinch pot to run some test glazes or to put other little elements so that they can go into the kiln safely. I don't care what my pinch pots look like. There's that. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to put some feet on the bottom of this just to show you what it would mean to attach something to it. For the feet, just take a chunk of that extra clay I had and roll a ball. Now, because this little ball around the thickness of the handle of my fettling knife, I don't have to worry too much about having created those air bubbles. As long as you stick with the rule of thickness of this handle, then you should be pretty good to go. So I'm going to roll out 3 of those so I can put 3 little feet on this thing. You could, attach all kinds of things to this, handles, make little designs with these little attachments. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and make this into a triangle. And to do that, all I'm gonna do is flatten the back and point this out. So there was started as my pinch pot. I now have this triangle shape. And again, to clean up those edges, all you have to do is blend away. So here are my little feet, those little balls that I rolled. I'm just gonna tap a little flat place on it. Take my serrated rib, score, and to score you're just gonna scrape along in one direction, twist it a little bit, and scrape along in the other direction so you get a good cross little X thing happening. And then I'm gonna do that to the same spot that I'm gonna be applying it to. Might as well do the other two corners because I am gonna apply all three. And then I can take some of my slip, apply it to the piece or apply it to there, doesn't matter which, you don't need it in both places, just get it in one. And then you're gonna smack this on there. Now here's the thing, slip does help and aid in connecting this together, but it's not an end all be all. You need to follow it up with your fettling knife and come in and basically pick up a little tiny bit of clay from either the foot or the base and smush it into the bottom of the piece here. So I'm just taking from my foot with the edge of the fettling knife and just scooping a little bit of that clay, squishing it down into the base. That way, this is good and stuck on there. If I give it a little wiggle, it's not going anywhere because I did that blending part. You can go in and clean up all of those little marks you might have made with the fettling knife. I would like to mention that whatever condition you leave this clay in before it goes into the kiln is gonna come out that way. When you go to glaze this piece, throwing that on top of it is not gonna cover it up. So whatever you leave that condition in, it's how it's coming back out. Get those other two on for you so you can see that again. Just gonna flatten that. Cross in two different directions. A little bit of slip, smush. Now see, if I tap on this, it can just plop right off. And as soon as that slip dries up, that's exactly what's gonna happen if you don't do the blending part. So you wanna get in there and you wanna make sure that you remember to just pull little bits of that clay and smush it on down. Now your slip should be made of the same type of clay body that you have here. So if you have little bits of clay that are too dry to work with or that are falling off, you can just go ahead, take those little bits and continue throwing them back into your slip bucket and they'll break down and can make more slip for you. You may have to add a little bit of water here and there if it looks a little too chunky, but usually a day or two and those big chunks will also begin to break down. Next, do that last one. And then I'm going to talk about a little bit of texturing. So go ahead and put that in. So I did not go crazy with blending my side because I absolutely love texture. It's just one of my favorite things when it comes to clay. I love adding tons and tons of texture however I can. And you can find all kinds of random tools to do that. You could find a pine cone. You could find, the thing that you use to tenderize the meat in the kitchen, the meat tenderizer. I usually will just leave my surface the way it is and then go in and texture the heck out of the whole thing. And a very simple way to add texture, you could take your serrated rib and use that to just carve away and add texture to it. And you can see in doing this, kind of hides all of those imperfections that I had. So that's one way to texture. Sometimes I like using a wire brush, those brushes that you get to clean your grill, that you can find at the 99-cent store. That creates some really interesting texture. You could, take small bits of clay, press them into random things. That could create some funky texture, and then I can just score and slip and smack that on there. So I encourage you to try and find as many random things that you could to texturize the outside and make it a more interesting looking thing. Especially if you are making these as test samples, the texture is really helpful because different glazes do different things in the kiln. Maybe a yellow glaze that's really thin, and when you fire it up, you'll still see this texture, but there might be some other glazes that you apply to this that becomes so thick that when you put it on, all of the texture that you went on there to do just completely wipes off. And the same thing happens when you're glazing over things. So some glazes might actually stick to the entire foot of this piece. Other glazes might roll over and just kind of fall off of it while it's in the fire. I highly recommend that you experiment with different thicknesses of textures. It just makes it a lot more interesting, and especially when you're dealing with a clay body that really does not like being overworked. That little bit of texture can just go a long way with making it look more like a finished piece. Because I did add these components onto here, the next move I would make is to wrap this up overnight in a little bit of plastic, a little board or something around. You just place that on top of that, wrap it up with some of this drop cloth for at least one night. Doing that will allow this joint to fully adhere. So anytime you physically slip and score and attach anything to your pieces, you want to give it that overnight resting time to really equalize and have all of that slip and the joint get a really good grab onto there so that it doesn't go and fall off in the kiln. Now, hopefully you did a good job with the slipping and scoring, so it wouldn't be that issue. You just want to make sure that you can kind of help it along as best as you possibly can. Once the clay does begin drying, it begins to shrink. So also what would be helpful is throw a piece of newspaper on it, because when the clay shrinks, the newspaper will kind of glide along the board with it and it doesn't get stuck onto it, so you don't have to worry about it cracking or damaging the piece that you made. So just a piece of your basic newspaper slipped underneath, wrap it all up, set it aside, and after one night it's good to go to get off to the kiln once it's completely dry. Okay, so that's basically all I have for you in this pinch pot tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and subscribe if you have not done so already, and I hope to see you soon.